Which Metaspeed is right for me? I feel like that's probably a question that a lot of runners are asking themselves right now as they look at the new Asics Metaspeed Paris series. To me, the answer is pretty straightforward. It comes down to really feel. But to understand the feel, you need to understand the differences between the two shoes and the technology and why they're built the way they're built. So in this video, I'm going to break down how the Metaspeeds differ, and by doing that, I'm also going to go over how all super shoes differ and really fall into one of two categories, which the Metaspeed Sky and the Metaspeed Edge represent. Now, this will not be my review of the Metaspeed Edge Paris. That's the one I bought. I also tried on the Metaspeed Sky Paris. That will be the next video on this channel. This is just going to go into the tech of the shoes and help you determine which one's going to be right for you. Why are there two Metaspeeds? Well, this goes back to the origination of the original Metaspeeds a few years ago and Asics' determination of creating two shoes to make a more personal ride for more runners based on, do you take bigger steps or do you take more steps? So if you take bigger steps, you're a stride runner. If you take more steps, you're a cadence runner. Now, biomechanically, that's a really interesting idea, and there is something there. But from a marketing standpoint, it's really, really difficult to communicate that. But with the introduction of the new Metaspeed Paris series, I think Asics has actually made this choice a little bit easier because they've fundamentally made the Metaspeed Sky Paris and the Metaspeed Edge Paris really the same shoe. So if you look at the specs, you can see that the heel, forefoot, and drop specs between the Sky and the Edge are now the same. The weight differs by a couple grams, but you're never going to notice that on foot. Fundamentally, these are the same shoe. The only difference now between the Metaspeeds is the plate configuration. Now, thankfully, Asics has made it a little bit easier to tell the difference between the Sky and the Edge in the Paris series with a few visual differences. So as you can see in the profile shot of the shoe, if you look at the black band, the black and yellow band in the forefoot, you can see that the Sky has more yellow and the Edge has more black. That's actually showing you where the plate actually is and the sort of angle of the plate in the forefoot. Another difference between the shoes, and I think this is probably the easier one to tell the difference in, is that the Metaspeed Sky Paris has an orange outsole, or some people are now calling it a pink outsole, and the Metaspeed Edge Paris has a black outsole. Now, I actually bought the Metaspeed Edge Paris this generation, but I did try on the Metaspeed Sky Paris. And I will say that while the specs of the shoes are fundamentally the same, and the fit of the shoes is actually pretty similar, there is a difference. The Metaspeed Sky is slightly wider in the forefoot, and that's because of the carbon fiber plate. The plate is actually a little bit wider in the forefoot, and therefore the fit of the Sky is a little bit more generous in the forefoot and a little bit in the midfoot. We're talking a few millimeters. It is not a wide shoe. Neither one of these is a wide shoe, but because of the slightly wider plate, there is a little bit more width in the forefoot of the Metaspeed Sky Paris. And as you can see from this animation, if you watch the medial side, the inside or the right side of the screen, you'll see that in the forefoot, there's actually a little bit more width on the big toe area. So on the top of the medial side, you can see there's a little bit more outsole there. There's a little bit more width there. And the curve into the midfoot from the forefoot on the Sky is a little less exaggerated. But where does this difference originate? Well, it originates from Nike. So if we look at the Alphafly, this one specifically the Alphafly 3 and the Vaporfly 3, we can see clearly the differences in the plate configurations. The Alphafly has what I would call a high plate. It's a plate that runs in the middle of the midsole or closer to the foot, which puts all of the Alphafly tech, the AirPods, under the plate, between the plate and the ground, which gives you that sort of bouncy feeling that the Alphafly is known for. Whereas the Vaporfly is the more traditional, kind of original way of doing a carbon fiber plated shoe, where the plate swoops down very close to the ground in the forefoot and then curls back up into the toe spring. Those two configurations are essentially the configurations that all super shoes use. Now, if we look at the Metaspeed series, we can see the same basic tech. The Metaspeed Sky is the analog to the Alphafly, or the high plate. And I will give Asics credit here. They have pushed the Sky a little bit beyond even what the Alphafly is doing, with the much higher, flatter plate that puts more of that compressive foam between the plate and the ground, which again gives you that sort of bouncier ride that I think a lot of people like about the Sky. And then the Metaspeed Edge Paris has that plate that dips into the forefoot very close to the ground. Not as close to the ground or as much of an extreme dip as the Nike Vaporfly does, but fundamentally it's the same idea. So we have what I would call the high plate with the Metaspeed Sky and the low plate with the Metaspeed Edge. Looking at the differences between these two configurations, let's start with the high plate. So if you see the cross section of the forefoot, what we have there is a lot of foam under the foot, and then the black line represents where the plate sits. So in the high plate configuration, the plate sits very close to the foot, sometimes in the middle of the midsole. In the Sky specifically, it's much closer to the foot. It's above center. And what that's doing is using the plate as a big piece of leverage to kind of equalize all the pressures in the foot so that you can load all of that foam between the plate and the ground. And that's where the magic of the high plate comes in. Now in the Alphafly, you have the AirPods there, but in the Metaspeed Sky, you have a ton of beautiful FF Turbo Plus foam there now. So when it's unloaded or neutral, you have all of that foam between the plate and the ground, and when it's loaded or compressed, you're actually compressing the foam between the plate and the ground. So again, the plate is equalizing all the forces out of the foot and giving a lot of leverage to compress and load that foam between the plate and the ground, which gives you the rebound. It gives you that bouncy feeling that a lot of people like. However, the trade-off with this configuration is a level of instability. Because you usually have a very soft and compressive foam that you're loading between the leverage of the plate under the foot and the ground, that can give you some side-to-side instability. Now, in the low plate configuration, again, look at the cross-section. You can see that the plate sits much lower to the ground. Now, there's some other mechanics here coming from the Vaporfly of the dip in the midfoot. That's important, but what's really important here is the fact that the plate is sitting much closer to the ground in the forefoot, where you're really leveraging it. So when the shoe is unloaded and the foam is unloaded, you have a lot of foam between your foot and the plate. And when it's loaded or compressed, you're compressing the foam between the plate and the foot. Now, this typically will give you a firmer, more aggressive ride because you're basically riding the plate on the ground, and all the compression of the foam is really becoming between the plate and the foot. So the trade-off with this configuration often is it feels like you're sinking into the foam. Now, that's the classic Nike Vaporfly or Zoom X feel. The Metaspeed Edge Paris, the new FF Turbo Plus foam, isn't quite as compressive. You don't sink into it as much, but that sink is either a literal sinking into the foam like in Zoom X, or it's feeling the foam compress and sink more literally because it's right under the foot, between the foot and the plate. So a lot of runners may not necessarily prefer that, and they may find it overly aggressive because, again, you're riding on the plate, basically on the ground. Now that you know the difference between the feel of high plate to low plate, do you like bounding and bouncy, therefore you're a high plate runner and you're going to like the Metaspeed Sky Paris, or do you like a low plate, which is a rolling and more stable feel, therefore you're going to like the Metaspeed Edge Paris? But how do other super shoes fit into this category? And they all fit into this categorization. Other super shoes that fit into the high plate category would be the Nike Alphafly, any generation. The Saucony Endorphin Elite would also fit in there. The plate in that shoe is a little bit more in the middle of the shoe, but it has a very late stage rocker, and you're generally loading the foam in that shoe, so it does feel much more like a high plate shoe. Another shoe that would fit in this category would be the New Balance SC Elite V4. This is a shoe that I've tried on recently, and immediately trying it on, I was like, nope, this is not a shoe for me. This is not one I'm going to run in ever, because that is putting the plate, again, a little bit more in the middle of the shoe, but it's relying on loading up all of the foam between the plate and the ground, just like the Metaspeed Sky Paris. On the low plate side, we obviously have the Nike Vaporfly. Again, any generation. That is really the shoe that defined the low plate category and really the super shoe category in general. So that still is probably the best low plate version shoe in there, though the Metaspeed Edge Paris is very close. Another shoe that would fit in here would be the Adidas Pro Evo 1, the new kind of super shoe from Adidas. The Saucony Endorphin Pro 4 would fit in here. Really any generation of the Endorphin Pro or Speed, frankly. They all have a low plate configuration, would fit here. The Puma Fast R Elite 2 would fit in here. It doesn't look like it does, but that plate's actually very low in the forefoot, and it's, again, loading up a lot of foam between the ground and the foot, not the other way around. The Brooks Hyperion Elite 4 would also fit into this. That has a very low plate in the forefoot, though that shoe has other issues with the foam. And the Hoka Rocket X2 would actually fit into this low plate configuration, and that makes sense because a lot of people would describe that shoe as very firm. And lastly, there are two super shoes that kind of can go either direction here. The first one is the Adidas Adios Pro 3. Now, the configuration of the rods in that shoe are actually the low plate configuration. It's very close to the ground in the forefoot. But because that shoe has so much foam in the midsole, it does have that endless foam, rolly feeling that's very similar to the Metaspeed Sky feeling as well. So if you like the more aggressive rods in that shoe, which is something I like about that shoe, then you're going to probably want to look at other low plate shoes. If you like the rollingness and the amount of foam in the forefoot of that shoe, you may want to look at high plate configuration shoes. Another shoe that kind of breaks this high plate, low plate configuration is the Hoka Ciela X1. Now, from a configuration standpoint, that is a low plate shoe. The plate is fairly close to the ground. Not necessarily on the ground, but it's closer to the ground than it is the foot in the forefoot. But there is so much foam, so much rocker in that shoe that it kind of feels more like the Metaspeed Sky or an Alpha Fly than it does a Vaporfly or a Metaspeed Edge. So that one may break this, though I would say that if you like that shoe, you probably really like that shoe, and that's going to be your super shoe, and you're probably not even looking at any of these other super shoes. To say it simply, high plate configuration, bounding and bouncy feel underfoot, you're going to like the Metaspeed Sky Paris. Low plate configuration, rolling and stable feel, you're going to like the Metaspeed Edge Paris. And then hopefully I've given you enough information to understand what other super shoes are going to fit into those categories, or if you run in any of the super shoes I mentioned in this video, which Metaspeed is going to be right for you to look at, or what other super shoes based on the one you like are probably going to be appropriate for you. If you have any other questions, let me know in the comments below. Any questions you have around the differences between these two, and my review for the Metaspeed Edge Paris will be coming up the next video on the channel. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you find this content useful, consider subscribing. You'll see more content from me pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps the channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.